Welcome to the jungle. I'm Eric Holtzclaw with Liger Partners, coming to you from Liger HQ this morning, speaking with Brenden Kumarasamy for a Master Talk. And Brenden, I still use your last name because I was just showing off.
Very well done, Eric.
So thanks for joining us this morning.
Of course, my pleasure to be here.
So tell me, where in the world are you coming from?
Coming from Montreal, Canada.
Montreal, very, very nice. So tell me a little bit about Master Talk and what you do in that practice area.
Of course, happy to do that. So my name is Brenden. I'm the founder of Master Talk. It's a YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of public speaking and communication. How I got started is really simple. I was in university. I wanted to be a management consultant, so I worked really hard at university, do a bunch of competitions, presented a lot, probably over 500 times, coached a bunch of people. And then I was able to secure that job, and I just asked myself after, what can I do to make a difference in the world? And I realized public speaking was a huge issue, and not many people can afford a speech coach. So I started making videos on the subject, and here we are today.
Nice. So you did that all over a YouTube channel?
That's correct.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I was telling you right before we came on air, I owned a research firm prior to this, and I sort of was the Wizard of Oz. So I did all the things behind the scenes and was talking with a marketing firm. They're like, oh, you need to start standing on stages. I was like, I don't stand on stages. So I joined Speakeasy Toastmasters and Speakeasy and some of those others. But, talk about the importance of public speaking and kind of where that fits today. Because I talk with a lot of business owners in particular who never ever want to be known or seen. They kind of want to hide behind their brand. And that just doesn't work in today's world.
Yeah, I think the way that I summarize it for a lot of my C-level executive clients is that everyone is a media company today.
Mm-hmm.
That is the best way to differentiate. Because at the end of the day, as you know very well with the successes you've had in your business, people buy from other people.
Right.
And the best way to get known, especially when it's high ticket sales and you're selling very big consulting contracts, people want to see what you're offering. People want to see what value you're bringing to the market. And from that value, then they decide to say this emotional decision to pay an extra amount of money for this person is well worth it. So we need to understand that public speaking is a way for us to share ideas at scale. So just 20, 30 years ago, if you had something important you wanted to say, stages were pretty much the limitation of what you're able to do. But in today's era, you can spread the same idea to millions of people with 10 to even 100 less cost than it used to be. So I think public speaking is an amazing area, especially in the virtual world where we can't really go outside anymore. So we need to find creative ways to still share our ideas without ever meeting people in person.
Yeah, and that's we talk with people about thinking about your company like a magazine. So if I were a magazine publisher, what would the magazine about my company be, and what would be the topics? And when you talk about those topics, you want to hear from the editor of the magazine, or you want to know who that kind of expert is in that category. So the business owner or some of the business leadership has to be willing to kind of put themselves out there. So when you start to work with individuals in this category, what are some of the first things that you see that they're either struggling with, or kind of places you really kind of have to help them out first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first step to mastering communication for everybody is to understand where the fear of public speaking comes from. Because a lot of us are scared, Eric. Whether you talk to someone in New Zealand, Japan, in the United States, we're all scared of public speaking, but we don't necessarily know why. The answer is fairly simple. If you think about it, most of the presentations we've given in our lives are forced. They're not optional. We don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Eric, you want to get breakfast and present all day? It's just not a thing.
Right.
We're in high school, we're in college, we're in university. And three things happen in that environment. One, we never get to pick the topic. It's never something we're passionate about. And if we do get to pick the topic, it's usually not in alignment with our interests. Two, the students in the classroom don't care to listen to us, not because they don't care about us, but because they're worried about their own presentation that they have to give in 10 minutes, which is a very odd situation, because most situations where you speak, people aren't presenting after you, so they have all their attention on you. And number three, students, or more specifically teachers, are too stressed to coach you. They're very well educated, very well intentioned, but if they have 50 students to go through in 2 classes, they don't have time to sit us down. So with all of these issues, Eric, this gets perpetuated in every subject in our lives. Math, English, sciences. If we're at school, it's tied to a grade. If we're at work, it's tied to a result. So it's always based on a responsibility and obligation. By switching that mindset to this very conversation that we're having about sharing an idea, that's how we master public speaking.
Nice. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, they talk about it being, the greatest fear for public speaking is death. The people are always more afraid to do that. And there is often a lot of pressure around it, right? It is this like, I'm going to grade, or I'm going to get graded or judged. And if you can think about the fact that you know way more than your audience does about the topic, or you wouldn't have been asked to present it, then that puts you in a position of power, and kind of simplifying the message down and understanding and realizing. I talk with people about, I gave a training at our company a week ago, and I said, the unfortunate thing about this is a week from now, you will only remember 6% of what I said. so that means you got to say your message over and over again and be okay to reiterate it and kind of share it in multiple mediums. And that was really smart of you to jump on the kind of YouTube and all that as a kind of an emerging trend. What do you find are some of the more popular topics that you talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so a couple of things that I'd love to bring up that you mentioned that I loved is this idea that most people won't remember what you say. They'll only remember the emotion or how you felt from that idea. So one framework that I can share that will really help people think through this is the following scenario. Let's say it's the last presentation you'll ever give in your life. And in that presentation, because after that you don't get to speak again, you can present for as long as you want, but your audience will not remember your name, they won't remember your title, and won't remember your content, but they will remember one sentence. What do you want the sentence to be? If you can convince your audience of that one and only sentence, that is all it takes to win. So if you take me as an example, there's a lot of trainings I do. There's a lot of clients that I work with different ranges, 10-year-old girls in leadership programs, senior executives, and I'm always sharing different types of advice relating to communication. But if there's one sentence that summarizes the whole thing, it's that anyone can do it. If I went from a kid who grew up in a French education system and gave presentations in a language I didn't even know, I'm sure anybody in the world can master it. And if I can convince people of that one sentence, Eric, they'll follow up with me. They'll watch the videos. They'll listen to more podcasts like this. They'll join a Toastmasters club that I'm a huge fan of myself. So that's really the key. So going back to the popular topics, I talk a lot about things that are on most people's minds. The fear of public speaking. Where does it come from? How to manage vocal variety and use different emotions to drive different decisions. How do you speak better through less filler words? And obviously, of course, how do you present as an introvert and get your confidence up as well?
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure in telling somebody this is the last presentation you're ever going to get. But it does make you, fine tune it down to what is that one sentence I want to get across. So yeah, I was like, wow, that's scary. It's the last presentation I'm ever going to give, and I have to leave them with something. So.
And that's why you're going to remember that advice the rest of your life, Eric, because I made it that extreme. That's
Well, it is about extreme. That's from a marketing perspective, and often when we're working with companies, it's about fine-tuning their message and getting their people out there to kind of talk about it. And we tell them we don't want anything lukewarm. If it's lukewarm, no one's ever going to remember it. So either make me angry, make me cry, make me mad, something, give me some kind of visceral reaction. If there's no visceral reaction to what we're doing, then we might as well not do it. It just becomes background noise.
Absolutely.
And so talking about, how in today's kind of new world, right? So there's events will come back eventually. We're not sure when, but so that I could see that category being a big one for you, of someone preparing for the big stage or wanting to give a presentation. What are you doing now? What's the advice? Are you working with people on how to present online? What's kind of the category you're seeing sort of emerge as we live through this interesting time?
Absolutely. So the way that I see this, Eric, is that the virtual world and the in-person world is similar, except for a few key differences that I'd love to point out. So the first one is that we cannot gauge the reaction of our audiences. So let's say when we're in person, let's say I'm in Atlanta, I'm giving a workshop to everyone in the company, and I say a joke. Two things are going to happen. One, you're going to look at me and say, "Oh, Brendan's a funny guy. This was funny. I'm going to start laughing." Or more likely, number two, you're going to look at me and say, "This guy's not funny. He really shouldn't be saying any jokes." But either way, I get the real-time feedback from yourself and everyone sitting there and saying, "Okay, maybe I'm not that funny. Maybe I should adjust the way that I present for next time." But you don't get that feedback in an online presentation. Even in this very conversation we're having right now, and it's just one-to-one, I actually don't know how you're reacting to me because I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at the camera lens. Because if I looked at
Right.
you, it doesn't look like I'm looking at the camera at all or
Right,
looking at
right.
you directly. But when you have 25 people on a Zoom call, you can't see anybody. So the point and the message I'm driving is the same joke that you said in person in Atlanta. You need to say with the same amount of energy, the same amount of positivity, the same amount of enthusiasm, and assume it's funny. And that is why the online world is a bit more challenging. So what's my advice? My advice is get people you don't like on a Zoom call to give you hardcore feedback, whether it's the audio setup, the hair, the way that you're dressed, the background. Let them critique every part of your presentation until it's perfect. And the second thing is imagine the perfect in-person audience. So when I started podcasting on shows, you can imagine how stressful it is. You're kind of just sitting there like, why is a stranger asking me questions? But after 100 shows, you get really comfortable because the intention that you have when you jump into a presentation is different. Because you say, well, Eric is a very successful business owner. He doesn't need to be making this podcast. He does it to add value to other people. So I'm going to assume that Eric is a well-intentioned human, even if I don't know him. And that is the intention that switches as you get better in the online world.
Yeah, very nice. I like that. The interesting thing, talking about that kind of concept of giving those presentations in the virtual world, I've been through Toastmasters, I've given speeches on stages, and then I did a webinar with Forrester. That was the most painful because you couldn't see anyone. You literally presented to your slides for an hour and just spoke. And that was it. You weren't in the chat room. You didn't know if, like, it was, I think I was in a hotel room because I was like traveling when that happened. That's one of the hardest types of presentations to give. You think that, oh, I'm hidden behind the slides and it's going to be easier. It's far harder because you don't have any of that, reaction, right? And that's part of what I think we're seeing too with all these Zoom calls. You're like on 1,000 Zoom calls a day, and
yeah,
although you see everybody, you don't see anybody, because you're just basically presenting to your screen all day long. So yeah. So talk to me a little bit. So you and I shared at the beginning that I'm an introvert. Nobody ever believes it. I'm like, yeah, this is not what I am. So you said that you have some specific tips for introverts. So what are some of your tips for introverts as it relates to giving a good presentation, or just getting over the fact that they've got to start giving presentations?
Right. So one thing I want to point out for everyone who's listening right now is introverts are some of the best people I work with. The issue is not whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, but rather your willingness to understand your own strengths and learn from the others. So I'll give you an example. There are 3 things that introverts do way better than extroverts in presentations that I'd love to point out. 1, pauses and silences. So we all know that as speakers, when we pause effectively, like I'm demonstrating right now, it allows you to make your presentations more powerful. But here's the deal. Introverts, it's really easy for them to grasp because they spend more time on average in silence. So when I ask them to pause for 7 seconds or 5 seconds just to get them practicing, it's very easy for them. But it wasn't so easy for me. As you can tell, I'm very extroverted. I love to talk. So when I started pausing, it was extremely uncomfortable because when I'm at a bar, when I'm at an event, when I'm speaking, I like to talk. I don't like to keep the silence there. So it's tricky for me to master. Number 2, introverts are much better listeners than extroverts. If I'm talking all the time, I'm not listening to what you need, Eric. What are the needs of the company? What are the needs of the podcast? And it's harder for me to tailor my message to what you're looking for. But an introvert can do that easily because they spend more time listening to the needs of their audiences. And number 3, it's much easier for an introvert to hold space for an audience than an extrovert. The issue with being an extrovert is you lie in extremes. So a good example I can give as a speaker is Tony Robbins and Gary Vaynerchuk. You're either really going to like them or you're really not going to like them. You're either going to say,
You've been
go ahead.
listening to the conversations here at the office because I'm not a Gary Vee fan. I'm a Marcus
There you
Lemonis.
go.
We kind of go back and forth in the office because Whitney, who's my business partner, she's a big Gary Vee fan. So yeah.
There you go. There you go. So that's like the perfect example. But let's say we compared, this is going to be good because you're a marketing guy. Let's say we compared Gary Vee to Seth Godin. There's nobody out there who goes, I hate Seth Godin. Nobody says that. Why? Because I'm not saying Seth's an introvert, but what I am saying is he's definitely more introverted than Gary in the way that he speaks. So why is that important? Introverts in general love their space. So that means they're a lot more respectful of other people's space, which means they're less polarizing. So why did I tell you all of this? I told you all of this to prove a singular point, which is it doesn't matter if you're introverted or extroverted. Are you willing to work on your strengths and acknowledge what the other person can bring you? So I'm an extrovert. I'm really good at voice projection. I'm not afraid to take extra risks. I'm not afraid to speak my mind and to be a bit more louder. But at the same time, I learned how to use low vocal varieties, how to speak to an introvert in a way that works for them, and how to speak in that way so I can learn from that style as well. So I can vary the way that I speak based on who I'm talking to.
Very nice. I like what you said, play to your strengths, but what you're saying is it's almost emphasizing what you consider your weakness, right? Everybody's like, this is my weakness, but honestly, that's your strength. Like if you just play into it versus, playing it as the thing that I've got to either compensate or overcome. And, when we're working with these brilliant owners of companies or people who know their subject matter very well, that's the thing is like, you've got to be the person who talks about it because no one can fake it. They can't fake the knowledge. Like you could take the best speaker in the world and try to get them to talk about a topic and you're going to see through it. You're going to see through it. So it's got to be the person who knows the topic. And like a Seth Godin or a Malcolm Gladwell with the crazy hair or whatever, like you sort of appreciate that, right? It's got that it's something that's memorable. So that's nice. So as we kind of wrap up and think about this, like what are some tips to get started? So like, let's say that I am running a company now, I didn't really expect to end up in this world where I have to be digital and go on camera and, that's just not my thing. Like what are some ways that I can get started that may feel safer for me in that space? Absolutely.
So of course, watching the YouTube videos is safe since nobody's watching besides you and you're kind of I kind of made those for introverts, but I think the other thing, an exercise you can do every day is called the random word exercise. Let's demonstrate this really quickly. Eric, why don't you just give me a random word?
Wow, you threw me off. Random word. I'll think camera.
Camera, sure. Okay, you made it easy for me. So what I need to do is I need to create a presentation out of thin air. So here we go. Shots. The shots that we take on a camera are not just pictures. They're memories. They're moments in time that we remember as we go about our lives. From the moment we see our children grow up, to the moment they go to school, to the travels that we take on, to our favorite restaurants. Cameras allow us to capture the shots that matter. That's exactly why in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the evolution of cameras and how we went from a $10,000 one to every single human being having a singular camera in their smartphones. So notice I just invented that out of thin air, but you made it easy on me. Some people just give me hippo and I'm just like, how do I work with this? But the idea is simple.
Yeah, the hook. You're talking about hooking them in, like hook them.
Of course. Yeah. But there's a couple things I want to emphasize the exercise. One, never compare yourself to me because I've done this exercise over 2,000 times. The second thing I want to emphasize is all I'm asking for is 5 minutes of your day. Every day, 5 words, 1 minute each. Lamp, camera, tree, laundry. If you just do this for 5 minutes for a year, you'll have done the exercise over 1,800 times. And the punchline is, because I know a lot of you are looking at, why does this matter? It matters because it's a mental shift in the way that you think about presentations. Because if you could speak on hippos, Eric, for a minute, when you go back to your subject matter expertise, marketing that you've been crafting for your clients for years, that presentation becomes a joke, becomes easy. And that's the shift I want for people.
Well, and I love you presenting it as that hook, right? Like, what's that thing that's going to make me care at the very beginning? Like, how do I change that? The other secret that I'll share, since we're talking about speaking. So I'm a perfectionist. And so when I joined Toastmasters, my biggest issue is that I would write a speech like that, and I would want to give it exactly the way that I wrote it. And so I would get up to give the presentation and realize that, like, I'd trip up, right? Like, I'd get part of the way through and I was trying to rote memorize the presentation. And so I learned Roman rooms, which is basically the equivalent of associating each part of your presentation with something in a room that you know very well. So like, you walk into the room and I'm going to talk about this as I look at this thing visually. And that's what saved my ability to ever give a presentation, because then I could just take the major topics and associate to that. And then that way I didn't have to give this presentation so perfectly, because once I hit imperfection, I was done. Like, I couldn't recover from it. And so it has to be like, I know what I'm going to talk about, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to say it. So it might be helpful to some other people who have that same issue. And I run into it with the podcast. I didn't see, and I don't think you're one that came in with like pages of notes. I have people who show up, they've got like pages of notes. And I'm like, you're not going to need those. Like, honestly, we're just going to talk about you and talk about what you do. You'll be fine, right? But they have written pages and hours of notes. So anyway, so Master Talk. So are you Master Talk on YouTube, or how do people let's make sure they know how to find you and get to all of your information?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a quick tip for podcasts for people who are going to be guests or are interested in doing that. Just realize that if you go on 50 shows, there isn't a question anymore that an interview can ask you that you already know the answer to, right? So just keep doing more of them. Well, anyways, if you want to
come up with give me some random word. That totally tripped me up. I was like, some random word. So yeah.
You could have just said jungle.
I know. I should have. Yeah. It's like, what can I say? The camera. So yeah. So tell us how do we find all of your information?
Of course. So for those who want to keep in touch, that would be Master Talk is the YouTube channel in one word, where I share all of my public speaking tips for free. And if you want to check out or message me directly, that would be Instagram. So that's Master Your Talk. I answer any DMs, so don't be shy to reach out if you have any questions.
Very nice. So Brenden Kumarasamy.
You got it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us on The Jungle this morning.
My pleasure.